Perfect. I mean, let's get going, shall we, Matt? So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to our Remodeling Your Approach to Search webinar. So, a little bit of background for those guys who've joined us before. The Selesti webinars aim to help businesses across all sectors make the most of their marketing efforts. Each webinar will have a theme talk, and we'll focus on one specific area of marketing, so we can really help you drill down into the details and give you actionable tips that you can immediately impact your marketing efforts. So my name's Louise. For those guys who have joined into the webinars before, I'm kind of your host. I'm actually a SEO account manager here at Selesti. So as you know, today's webinar is going to be focusing on SEO and the recent updates with our very own Matt Hurd, who's a strategy director here at Selesti. He'll be talking us through the subject. So as usual, if you've got any questions throughout the talk, then pop them in the bottom right-hand Q&A tab, where we'll answer them at the end. The webinar and the questions will be about 30 minutes long. What we're going to do is we'll turn the cameras off due to bandwidth. In terms of the presentation as well, what we'll be doing is we'll send that presentation round in the next few days, so you don't have to make too many notes or anything like that. So without further ado, I would be pleased to introduce you to Matt.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just share my screen with the presentation and also just turn my camera off as it's looking a bit windy outside, so at any point the bandwidth will probably drop. Just give me one moment and we will get going. Okay, so here we are. Yes, good morning. So thank you very much for joining us all today, midway through lockdown number 2. For those of you who have joined some of these webinars in the past, you'll probably notice after this, when I turn the camera back on, that I once again failed to get a haircut booked in before the start of lockdown. And we're also live from my upstairs bedroom today, as downstairs we may get disturbed by a giant black Labrador, which is not ideal. Anyway, as you said, I'm Matt. I'm the Digital Strategy Director here at Selesti. And as at Selesti, you know, we work with a wide variety of B2C, B2B brands, from local businesses all the way up to large multinationals. You know, idea is that we deliver campaigns that are backed by data across all sorts of different channels to help our clients scale up, grow, and achieve their business goals. We have also very recently, pleased to say that we've become B Corp certified, which aligns really well with our vision and our aim of becoming a force for good, balancing profit with purpose, people, and the planet. In fact, I believe we are the first and so far only Google Premier agency to be certified B Corp, which is something we're all collectively very proud of. It was a fairly long and at times quite arduous process, as I'm sure our Chief Exec Ollie and our Operations Director Kate will be able to attest. But if anyone joining us today is interested in finding out a little bit more about our journey to becoming B Corp, or interested in exploring it themselves, then please do reach out, and Ollie and the team will be more than happy to help. So as Louise said, the topic of this talk is designed to look at remodeling your approach to search, with a particular focus on the forthcoming page experience update that Google have announced. And hopefully following the talk, you'll have some good sort of thought starters and discussion points to feed into your strategy for 2021 and sort of beyond as well. And if you do have any questions throughout, as Lou said, please do use the question box below, and we can cover them off after the talk. So we'll crack on. So something new is coming. As some of you may be aware, Google have recently announced the page experience update. The page experience algorithm is designed to judge web pages based upon essentially how users experience and interact with them. This has recently been confirmed by Google as it's going to be rolled out in May 2021. And interestingly, in that recent announcement, they've also said they're going to test showing a visual indicator that highlights pages in search results that have a great page experience. And Google have done this before with sort of AMP icons, you may notice, on news stories or mobile-friendly labels in the past. Thus, it's sort of quite likely that if they do choose to roll this out fully, it means that websites with that kind of visual indicator in search results are likely to be more attractive to users, and therefore have a much higher sort of click-through rate and a bit more engagement from users themselves. So kind of what does it entail, I suppose, is the question. So it encompasses sort of numerous existing search ranking factors, so things like the safe browsing penalty, a secure ranking boost, is it mobile friendly, the page speed update, and also Google's core web vitals, which is something we'll go on to talk about a little bit more shortly. All other considerations being equal, this update means that Google is basically more likely to rank your pages higher if they provide a good experience. This is something we know that Google have been trying to get smarter at over the years, and it's just kind of the next step in that journey. But however, there's going to be all these factors, but also, you know, things like great content and other areas is always going to be a key ranking factor as well. Now, the fact that Google have pre-announced this update, and it's something they very rarely do. You know, traditionally, an algorithm update is rolled out and then we're told it's happened, or we notice it in organic traffic or rankings or turbulence. But the fact that they've announced it such a long way in advance means that this is likely to have a really wide-reaching impact, and it's something that we need to be ready for. It's really important. But the good news is that obviously it's not being rolled out until May 21, so it means we've also got plenty of time to prepare, which is excellent news. So, what does it actually mean? Well, as I've kind of highlighted, it's going to encompass known factors. So things like the mobile friendliness of a site, site speed, security, all those kind of things, and general metrics around sort of overall usability. But a large amount of this new focus is going to be covered by core web vitals. So what does this actually mean? Well, when we talk about core web vitals, it's a collection of sort of user-centered metrics that give scores on aspects of your website. So things like load time, interactivity, and stability of content. And these can mostly be classified under the following sort of key metrics. The first, large contentful paint, or LCP, so I haven't got to keep saying it, is a core web vitals metric which measures when the largest content element in a user's sort of browser or viewport becomes visible. Essentially, it can be used to determine when the main content of the page has finished rendering on a user's screen. And ideally, and unsurprisingly, you want this to be as fast as possible. So the most common causes of a poor LCP are things around sort of a slow server response time, or perhaps some render blocking JavaScript and CSS, or the slow resource load times, or in fact, if the website's rendered client side rather than server side. These can all be things that cause issues with the contentful paint. However, all of these are fixable, but it's worth attention nonetheless. If we move on to first input delay, this is a metric that measures a page's responsiveness during load. You know, as such, this only focuses on direct input events from actions like clicks, taps, and key presses, as opposed to sort of more continuous things like scrolling or moving the mouse around. Again, obviously one wants site elements to be as interactive and clickable as soon as possible. You know, this provides an excellent user experience, nothing more frustrating when it takes ages to kind of, I don't know, click onto the next page or answer a CTA. A common cause of a poor first input delay score may be things like the browser is actually busy loading other elements in the background, such as a large JavaScript file. And again, this is something we can do and kind of order this a bit better to make sure the page is as interactive as possible, as early as possible. Finally, cumulative layout shift measures the sum total of all of kind of the individual elements of a page and how often they shift around. So, you know, a layout shift occurs ultimately anytime a visible element changes its position from one area to the next. Now, I'm sure we've probably all experienced this at some point, whereby a web page is loading, all of a sudden, like something jumps up to the top or moves around, and you know, that's a really frustrating experience for a user. Ideally, we want the site layout to remain as stable as possible throughout. Now, all of this may seem like quite a lot to take in. However, the good news is that you can find a lot of information about your performance using the Core Web Vitals report in Search Console. The Core Web Vitals report looks at the pages on your site, essentially, checks their scores against these kind of Web Vitals data, and essentially puts them into buckets. You know, buckets of things that you need to either work on, are fine already, or could do with some improvement. There are mobile and desktop specific checks, and these may unsurprisingly differ. You know, traditionally it's harder to get a good score on mobile than it is on desktop. But you'll probably notice if you are using the report that the same URLs are often more troublesome on both mobile and desktop. They might load slightly faster in different areas due to change in test setting or browser speeds, but it's still a point of interest nonetheless. And you can use this tool in Search Console to identify problem pages and take action appropriately. You know, and this is great because, as I've said, we've got until May to deal with this. So it's a good thing to be looking at now because it means in the future we're well prepared. It's work that we're doing at Selesti for a lot of our clients already, is looking at this and making sure we're kind of ahead of the game. You know, and it's important to note that these Core Web Vitals are just going to be one of the many measures that Google will use in order to ascertain where and what to rank a website for. You know, but it's always going to be important to kind of tick all the boxes as possible to ensure that we're providing a great user experience. So I suppose the question now is how do we respond? So in our opinion, I think, and in light of these changes and the way that Google is shifting, it's becoming increasingly apparent to me and apparent that SEO needs to be kind of baked in across all aspects of a website's performance. You know, a traditional kind of one-off tech audit or minor on-page improvements probably aren't going to suffice anymore. You know, we need to take an all-encompassing view, a sort of holistic view of the site overall, and try and work out what it means to provide a best-in-class user experience. You know, similar to Google's new update, you know, this kind of process will cover a lot of things that SEO agencies and teams do already. However, it's about trying to highlight key issues across all of these areas in search and prioritizing all of them and fixing them accordingly. So what areas should we be looking at? Well, there's sort of some traditional areas around this. So things like content, you know, is your content decent? Does it serve a purpose? Is it relevant? Link quality, is there, you know, how's your backlink profile? Are there opportunities to improve it? Are there any dodgy backlinks? You know, overall user experience. So is your site meeting user expectations? Is it difficult to navigate? What things can we do to improve conversions and ensure users are kind of being funneled through to the correct areas? A more traditional kind of SEO tech audit, yes, it's still relevant. It's really important to highlight any technical issues that may be holding your site back from ranking. It's the foundation of any strong SEO strategy, really. And then mobile, you know, we know that Google now index mobile first for all sites. So if your site doesn't meet user expectations on mobile, then you're really likely to struggle. So if we can work through all of these things and bearing in mind the core web vitals and the fact that we know Google was only going to want to serve websites that are actually relevant and sort of interesting and useful to users, if we can take that view across all of these different areas, we should be well prepared for May. So we'll look at them in sort of a little bit more detail now. So we look at content, and you know, quality content is a known ranking factor. You know, everyone knows this. Is how many times has everyone on this webinar probably heard an SEO person like me say the phrase "content is king"? It's very much an overused phrase, but to an extent, you know, this is still true. But taking an in-depth look at your on-site content will really help to highlight areas of improvement and areas of focus to help feed into your content plan, you know, for the next year and indeed beyond. And we quite often will do something called a content audit at Selesti, and that's a really worthwhile and valuable thing to do. So we'll use tools like analytics, SEMrush, to ascertain how well content is performing, which is one area. But I think the key thing that people often miss is that we need to look at the value of the content. You know, is it actually adding value to the user journey? So metrics such as bounce rate, how much organic traffic is landing on the page, dwell time, pages visited, conversion rate, are all really useful in ascertaining how well content is performing on your site. You know, we can make recommendations at Selesti based upon what should be removed, updated, or perhaps combined to make sure we're getting best value from content marketing efforts. Some good questions to ask are kind of the three here you can see on the screen. So it's like, is it useful? Is it relevant? Or perhaps more pertinently, is it still relevant? Quite often we see examples of quite dated content on websites, which really should either be updated or combined with perhaps some more current articles. And then also finally, does it add value to the user journey? Because if not, then it probably shouldn't be there. If you can answer all of these three questions with a yes, in most cases, it means that that content is relevant and should probably stay on the site. But if not, then it's something we need to look at. You know, and also to ensure that, you know, any content you're doing has the best chance of ranking well and effectively answering user needs, it's really worth performing some keyword research to understand what searchers are looking for, and also the associated volume of interest behind it, and then also how your business can effectively answer user needs to ensure that you are providing a quality experience. If we move on to sort of trust signals and backlinks, you know, Google often say in various blogs and announcements, ranking without links is really difficult, and that is absolutely spot on. They are seen as a natural indicator of a site's authority. You know, a link is the online equivalent of me recommending a particular restaurant or bar to a friend. You know, it's seen as a much more natural and trustworthy indicator of a website's authority than sort of stuff coming from the site itself. So it's really good to kind of help boost your authority and overall, hopefully your ranking and organic traffic as well. So you can use tools like Search Console, or Majestic SEO is a really good one to help identify the quality of your backlink profile. If you were to use something like Majestic SEO, you'll notice there are two key metrics, and that's trust flow and citation flow. So trust flow is a measure of how good the sites that link to you are and how authoritative they are. And citation flow is a measure of how many links you have pointing towards your site. When we're looking at links, it's really important to focus on the quality of the links you have, perhaps more so than the quantity. For instance, a good relevant link from a site such as The Guardian, for argument's sake, is likely to be of far more value than several links from a second-rate directory. And you can also do some competitor analysis using Majestic SEO, and that helps you to identify sort of potential gaps in your backlink profile, and then you can kind of plan your outreach and link building campaigns accordingly. Typically at Selesti, we tend to plan these outreach campaigns in a quarterly basis, and gives enough time to kind of really bolster a client's backlink profile. If we move on to the technical element, and as I mentioned earlier, tech SEO and sort of best practices for technical implementation are still a really, really important part of your SEO strategy, and also kind of chimes in with those core web vitals we were talking about earlier. You know, analysing how SEO friendly the technical elements of your site are can, you know, really help you identify things that might be holding you back. And, you know, typically we'll use tools like Screaming Frog and Search Console and SEMrush and a combination of several other areas to give a real in-depth view of a site. You know, this should look to cover areas like the site structure, internal link structure, have you got duplicate content, how accessible the site is, page speed and code standards, again, linking back into those core web vitals. And then stuff like technical implementation around site maps, meta tags, how Google sort of crawls your site is really important. You know, and while this might not be perhaps the most exciting area to focus on, unless you're me and enjoy tech SEO, but it's vitally important we do it, because often technical issues, simple technical fix, can be stopping a site from ranking well, meaning all of the effort that you're putting into content, site structure, UX, the overall design can be completely undone by actually often a very simple technical problem that may be stopping Google from crawling your site effectively. And if we move on to mobile, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we know that Google now index mobile first, which means that they will look at the mobile version of your site when deciding upon what and where to rank your site for any given keyword. So unsurprisingly, as such, the mobile friendliness of your site is of paramount importance. You know, if we're looking at the mobile friendliness of a site and kind of analysing how effective it is, you know, it's important to, again, highlight areas of improvement to ensure that we're providing our users with the optimum experience. So, you know, you should be considering things like responsive design. Is the site responsive? Does it crunch down across various different devices? You know, on mobile, we can particularly consider, you know, is the site optimized well for local searches? You know, a lot of searches on mobile are far more likely to be locally focused as people are out and about, perhaps looking for a shop or a, well, I mean, people aren't out and about at the moment, but generally looking for a shop or somewhere that's nearby. And looking at how easy your site is to navigate on mobile, quite often that's not really considered in a mobile design. And like making sure we're using mobile friendly design features. So make sure the images crunch down, or the correct sizing of tap targets. So if you've got fat thumbs like me, you can still make sure you can highlight the key areas in the navigation. And then throughout, it's really important to consider that consistent experience across desktop and mobile in terms of the overall content and usability of the site, just to make sure that users are still getting the same value whether they were to access the site on desktop or indeed on mobile. And finally, performing a UX review can really help to ensure that we're identifying any potential issues that may be frustrating your users or causing a barrier to conversion. You know, we know this feeds into the overall algorithm. Ultimately, Google only really want to drive users to websites that are going to effectively answer a user's need. And if your website doesn't do that, or it's difficult to use or frustrating to use for a user, then clearly we're going to have some issues. And it's really worthwhile doing a UX audit to kind of identify pain points within that user journey. And you can look at covering areas sort of like some competitor analysis. So what are other people doing well? What are other brands doing badly? What's our area of opportunity? You know, more of a user journey analysis. So looking at the flow of users across the site. Have we got our key conversion pages buried too deeply, perhaps? Maybe we should be surfacing them high up, or alternatively, perhaps it's the other way around. We're not giving users enough time to digest the content on the site before reaching that conversion point. And again, reviewing sort of some of the user signals in analytics. So things like bounce rate, conversion rate are all going to be key indicators of perhaps how a site is performing from a usability perspective. And then also just a full audit of the existing website, you know, from perhaps a third party to identify, because often, you know, we can work on a website ourselves, and if you're working client side, it's very close and we know how to use that website, but it's also worthwhile doing some user testing. So, you know, again, normally we're perhaps just doing this in a lab. However, at the moment, that's not possible, but there's loads of great remote platforms you can use to kind of identify people in your target audience who can look at the website with sort of a fresh pair of eyes. And we often find this really useful in just sort of identifying areas which no one else has seen. And we can test particular user journeys or changes on the website that way. Again, you could do some A/B testing. So tools like Google Optimize, you could surface perhaps, I don't know, 2 different styles of CTA to see which one converts better. Or again, using tools like Hotjar to record user sessions and identify any kind of additional issues to be fixed. So anything around UX is really important that it's backed by data. So doing things like A/B testing is really useful, because then at least we know there's some empirical evidence that the changes we're suggesting are worthwhile, as opposed to someone like me just saying, I think we should change the CTA. And that's it. So in my opinion, I think it's really important to try and be as prepared as possible for the upcoming update. You know, we've got 6 months to plan for it. So let's put the process in place now to make sure we're in a really strong position for the future and giving brands and websites the best chance of maintaining and improving the organic positions and conversions over time. So I hope you all found this useful, and yeah, I look forward to answering any questions or discussions now.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that, Matt. We have actually had a few questions in, which I can bounce to you now. So I'm just running through them now, collecting them together. So one of the questions is, obviously you mentioned Search Console can be used to test the core web vitals. So what other reports can they use to test? And obviously, do they need to work alongside developers and things like that?
Well, I think, sorry, I didn't quite catch the second part of that. Could you just say it again?
Obviously, should they kind of work closely with the developers when it comes to the core vitals website?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you need, ultimately, to do it, you're going to need developer buy-in. That's sort of one of those things, you know, you can look in there, but it's really important. You know, I mean, at Selesti, we have our own team of developers. So like the SEO team will work with them to kind of ultimately recommend kind of the best practice solution. So yeah, I mean, it's really important, in my opinion, that sort of search teams and development teams work really closely together.
Yeah. And alongside that as well, obviously, in terms of the reports, so you can go into the Search Console and you have kind of the core web vitals area there, but you can also use page speed insights. Other tools such as GT metrics will give you a good kind of indication of how your page load speed is working. Chrome dev tools again, and Chrome UX report, and then any kind of web vitals extensions. So yeah, it's great, isn't it? We're kind of working very closely with our developers at the minute to kind of get that done and sorted, aren't we? It's on the top of the priority list. Another question that's come in, obviously, is related to the audits. So how often do we tend to do audits? And then the search experience audit, how does this work in a real world situation?
Well, around that, so in terms of sort of, say, a traditional tech audit, you know, I never feel we really need to do, we normally, if the client comes on board, we do a really in-depth one, straight up, just to identify what's going on. But really after that, if the site's being continually managed, it certainly is something that we would just kind of check in on occasionally. And then maybe if there was some big sweeping change to the site, perhaps a year on, we might do another in-depth one. But generally it's probably best practice, depending upon the size of the website and how many changes are being made to it, probably a really in-depth one once every year. You know, if it's a smaller site, you may not even need to do that. It's just kind of making sure we're staying on top of it, really. And then in practice, it's kind of trying to do all of these things together and then highlighting like basically a list of issues and a list of things to fix. And we tend to do it as sort of critical, high, medium and low. But if we kind of take that all-encompassing view, so rather than just looking at a tech audit, but we're looking at everything, so mobile friendliness, UX, everything else, it means then we get kind of a real good priority of all issues that are likely to be affecting search, and then kind of just work through them in priority order.
Robert, thank you for your question. So he just said he's in the middle of deploying a new website. So what questions can they ask the agency to check that they're on top of that update?
Oh, that is a good question. So I think it is probably a good starting point to see if this is something that they have considered, would be to ask them some questions around those core web vitals. And that'd probably be my starting point. So, you know, asking questions like, you know, have we considered, you know, things like the largest contentful paint? Have we considered, you know, the mobile friendliness of it? Have we considered site speed? You know, how are you planning to kind of work around that? That's normally a really good thing to do. And just kind of perhaps, and we can certainly send you a few links to some blog posts on it as well. And that'll kind of give you a bit more insight into the sort of questions you can ask. But a really good one would be basically asking, you know, have you considered the core web vitals as part of this? And what are we doing to make sure we're ahead of the game? Would be a really good question, I would suggest.
And that hopefully, you know, depending on the setup of your staging site or whatever, you might be able to start doing a few checks there as well. So you might be able to, you know, you might get a rough idea of how your page speed, obviously you might be on a staging kind of server and stuff which can slow everything down, but you know, there are things that you can start asking. And yeah, like you said, Matt, just actually ask them whether they actually know about the core web vitals.
Yeah, But that's a really good point on the staging website as well. You know, if there is a staging website set up and it's accessible, then it's probably a good time to start doing some tests on that as well. You know, you can use Google Lighthouse and Google PageSpeed Insights to kind of have a bit of a look.
We've also got a question in from Megan, so thank you. Just saying, would you mind listing the key platforms and tools that we can use to help improve our approach to search, and what in particular we can use them for? I know obviously we've mentioned Search Console quite a lot, so I guess it's just us kind of, what's our favourite tools?
What's our favourite tools? Well, we can both answer this one, I reckon. So Google Search Console is something that really you should have on every site, because it basically allows you to essentially see your website how Google sees it, which is a pretty good starting point, and it will highlight any real sort of critical issues, things like 404 pages or barriers to stop Google crawling the site. So that's really good. I would recommend using something like SEMrush. Is really good just to give you kind of like a top level view of sort of things that might be wrong with the website and things to fix. And then things sort of around Google's page speed is normally quite a good indicator of seeing sort of how fast the website is. Lou, have you got some as well? I'm sure you have.
In terms of, so Screaming Frog, I don't know whether you are looking for tools that are paid or are more on the free element, but I think Screaming Frog lets you crawl up to 500 URLs, I think. So if you've not got a massive website, Screaming Frog's a bit more techie, but they've got a lot of great resources there. So you can work out, you know, how search engines see your site, you can see all of your page titles, so you can start to get a real good list of what needs to be updated and everything like that. SEMrush, which Matt mentioned, if you get the kind of basic paid for version, you'll be able to do an audit alongside that. One of the things I love to use kind of most days is just some Chrome extensions as well, which can help you quite easily see how, say for example, if a link is no follow or follow, there's a Chrome extension for that. We've done, I know we did at least a year ago or something, we did some of our top favorite tools that we use within the team. So Megan, if you want, just ping us a message and we can send you a link to that article, and then we can also, you know, we might as well ask the rest of the team and just get a good list for you. But yeah, those are kind of the main things that I tend to use. And then yeah, Search Console, Google Analytics as well, just to see, you know, what is working and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, we've got another question, just 2 seconds, from Ollie, who says, we find lots of sites with plenty of kind of spurious, God, tongue twister for me today, backlinks, which still appear top 3 in the SERPs. So how do some sites get away with it?
Well, it kind of depends on the type of backlinks they are. So there's some which you'll pretty much see on every single site's backlink profile, which are basically kind of like scraper websites or directories, rubbish directories, which kind of Google are aware of and don't really lend any credit to them. If it's someone who is deliberately building spurious backlinks, eventually Google will catch up with them, essentially. So my thoughts on it generally are that typically if you're buying backlinks or creating dodgy backlinks, you'll tend to see a short-term boost. Absolutely. In the short term, for 6 months, 9 months, your website will almost certainly appear higher in SERPs for most key terms you're looking to rank for. However, in the long run, Google will catch up and basically form a manual penalty, which will essentially completely wreck your search engine results pages, and you'll really struggle to kind of recover from that. A really good example that always comes up with SEO circles is Interflora. They had that problem about 5 years ago. They had basically bought loads of dodgy backlinks, saw a massive boost for 6 or 7 months, and then were hammered with a manual penalty, and it took a long time to recover. So yeah, it's kind of having that more of a long-term view. I think it's people who tend to do that. It's short-term gain, but in the long run, sort of the Google police will catch up.
I mean, if anyone who kind of wants to have a proper in-depth read about it, look at Google Penguin algorithm update, and that was the one that hit. And yeah, when that came out, I think a lot of people had a lot of work to do in terms of getting manual penalties and stuff. But yeah, it's not, if you see a competitor doing it, don't follow it, because you're getting that short-term benefit, because like Matt said, at the end of the day, they will catch up with it. We've got a question from Hardev as well, which is kind of related to backlinks actually. So how do you go about getting a really good backlink strategy, and where does this responsibility lie with the agency or the client?
Well, I mean, our approach to that is very much, it's a partnership. So typically our approach is there's some sort of best practice things you can do, which is, analysing the existing backlink profile. Are we in the right directories? Are there any dodgy backlinks already that we need to get rid of? And then after that, it's kind of building on that by having a really sort of strong outreach strategy. So the way we structure that at Selesti is we'll work with clients. We'll generally tend to have quarterly campaign themes with a hero campaign, and then kind of look for opportunities for that to be featured. So for instance, for one of our clients recently, one of their products is featuring on a Guardian gift list, I think, that they're doing for Christmas, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of identifying those opportunities where our campaign or a client's products or something like that can be featured. But then also is about working in partnership, because sometimes it might be an opportunity for, if you're an expert in a particular space, for them to then kind of be an authoritative voice and give comment on an article that's in the Daily Mail, for argument's sake, and so on and so forth. So it's really just kind of finding a difference between the mainstream publications, more niche opportunities, and just ultimately trying to build the authority. But yeah.
I mean, as well, if you can be creative with it can really be quite fun for both the agency and yourselves. I know I read one about a couple of years back, an agency or someone had built links for a car park came to them and said, how do we strengthen our backlink profile? And, a car park is not, how are you going to get national coverage for a car park? And they decided on one day that they would take payment through Conkers. And so they called it kind of a bonkers for Conkers campaign. And yeah, they ended up getting that national coverage for something like that. Crazy idea, car park, pay for it with Conkers, but that's a way of being really creative and trying to get those kind of backlinks from it there as well.
Yeah, it's sort of often about, it might not be necessarily what you expect, but it's kind of like finding that niche opportunity to ultimately get some coverage. And yeah, it's great for SEO, but also then there's kind of the side benefit of it being really good for sort of PR and brand awareness as well. So it's kind of a win-win, really.
Yeah, perfect. And combining it with those local links and local citations and everything like that. And then I think lastly, we've had quite a lot of questions in, but we'll get through these. And then if anyone has got any more, then obviously feel free to ping them to us either via Twitter, LinkedIn, anything like that. We'll be happy to answer any questions there. But I think it's quite a good one to finish on. So what else do we need to look out for in 2021 to gain on our competitors, other than the things you've already covered, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a search perspective, the key one is that page experience update for now. I think obviously people, in particularly this year, as a result of that global pandemic you might be aware of, people are becoming more and more accustomed to searching online. So I think it's all about kind of trying to provide a really good experience, because it's all of a sudden going to become a lot more competitive from an e-commerce perspective, particularly if you're in that space. I think that generally there's going to be more of a trend, in my opinion, of people looking to buy and work more with local companies as a result of this. So again, looking at your local search sort of strategy and making sure we're appearing well for that is going to be really important going forward as well. And yeah, I think generally people are going to become a lot more digitally aware, I would say. So I think if your digital presence perhaps isn't there yet, or is more sort of you're on that journey, it's kind of important to try and accelerate that as much as possible. And obviously we don't know what's going to happen into Q1 and Q2 of next year, and it may be that people are going to increasingly look for perhaps more digital experiences as opposed to in person. So anything you can think of that where your brand or whatever it is that you're kind of in, you can kind of deliver a similar experience digitally, that's going to become really important, I think. So even if it's like a huge brand like John Lewis, yes, people are still going to go into John Lewis stores, but I think those big brands are going to increasingly try and find ways of being able to deliver that same feeling that it evokes digitally as well.
Yeah, that personal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. My main obviously thing is I love local SEO, and that is definitely for small to medium businesses, local SEO is really where you want to push that, making sure you get that strategy there. You need technical SEO to form the building blocks, making sure that your site is not going to impede you from ranking. But then with local SEO, so making sure that you optimize your Google My Business update. So say for example with lockdown, what has gone on? Have you updated your Google My business page, just to make sure that your customers are aware if you're closed or if you're open. Building those kind of local citations, so on yale.com and everything like that. Are you listed there? Is there a lot of confusion? Have you changed address? So make sure you go back and update that address to actually reflect your current one. Everything like that. And then, like you said, Matt, monitoring your competitors is obviously a big thing, and seeing if they change tact, does it work for them or does it not? Because if, you know, let's use them as learning to kind of cut through the amount of things that you've got to do.
I think it's important that we're just generally from a more broader marketing and comms sense, you know, I think it's really important at the moment that brands that, you know, seem to be authentic and you know, and have that voice and be real clear about, you know, things around, you know, even once the vaccine's here and into, you know, if we are going to, things around like delivery, for instance, you know, making it clear that it's going to be safe, contactless, all those sort of things, you know, that is still going to play on people's minds for probably at least the next 6 months, if not further. So it's kind of being really clear with our comms, you know, particularly when there's a lot of other noise around it.
Perfect. So just like to say thank you, obviously, to everyone who submitted the questions and everything like that. And thank you, obviously, to Matt for the presentation. It was brilliant. Just a reminder, obviously, we'll be sending around an email with the presentation slides from today in the next couple of days. Keep an update or keep a kind of eye on our Knowledge Hub, because we've got lots of further tips and advice there. And like I said, you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like that, and we'll be happy to kind of answer any questions that you have there. But I think that's it from all of us. So I'd just like to say thank you for tuning in, and we'll hopefully speak to you soon.